All right. Apologies for the delay. And it still says waiting for Game Audio Hour, episode 188. That's weird. On YouTube, it says it's live. We are on YouTube? All right. Well, then I'm going to go here. And I'm going to start, I think. I think. Are we going? I think we're going.
We're here. Yeah, we're good.
Yes, it is, in fact, another manic Monday. I used to think when that song came out, when I was a little kid, that they were talking about a magic Monday. I was like, if it's a magic Monday, why would you wish it was Sunday? I mean, really, seriously.
Deep.
It could be dark magic. It could be evil, like necromancy Monday. And then, there could be some concerns about that.
Never underestimate the depth of the bangles.
All right. Oh my gosh, I know what's going on. There are multiple YouTube videos happening here. There is a Game Audio Hour 188 that people are waiting for, which is not the same as the live YouTube video that we're currently broadcasting to. Can someone get me the link of the Game Audio Hour 188 that's currently working?
Yeah,
sure.
See, true fans would know where to find the real video. It's just the posers who are at our usual video spot.
Yeah. Let's see here. What do we got? Is it up here? So let's see. This is the YouTube link. Yes, this YouTube link is different. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to say, hey, go here for the actual video. So yeah, restream shenanigans, apologies, and let's actually try starting with a proper Game Audio Hour episode 188. This is a fortnightly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experiences to audio secrets. Here is where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. And I'm Vince, and I'm a dork, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get this working perfectly smoothly. But that's okay, because all these other people are really awesome game audio and music dorks along with me, and far more productive than I will ever be. Alex, how are you doing?
I'm well. Yes, Vince has failed to, get a live call on Skype with audio streamed through Reaper onto YouTube and Twitch at the same time, and sending out tweets. I think you undersell yourself, Vince. You're doing a superb job. I'm very good, thank you very much. Anyway, let's go down.
Yes,
Mike.
I hope you're speaking metaphorically. It's just a little bit like the opening of the Brady Bunch, where they would all look at each other and the split screen. Anyway, I'm doing well, and major props to Vince for juggling the several concurrent and not necessarily benevolent technologies that we were harnessing at the same time in order to broadcast to you.
Thank you. Let's move on to Chase.
Hello. I'm appreciating all the hard work and efforts that go into this and the contributions. And we're finally here. We're together, all together at once, considering the myriad of situations that have transpired, right?
That's true. Yeah, a lot has happened over the past what, 4 weeks since the last episode? I think it was.
Yes, whole lot of weeks.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of stuff. It's been going a little bit crazy outside, but game audio is still moving on. We're still moving on in our respective positions and professions, and games are still going on. If anything, it's kind of one of those places that's a real reprieve for a lot of people out there. And so I'm happy to keep on going and putting stuff out there that helps people, even if a little bit during this time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Game saving the day once again,
Yeah.
no matter where you are.
Yep. Well, let's try to hit some hard game audio topics right now. We can wax philosophical all we want, but there definitely have been some things that we've left hanging from previous episodes that we really wanted to get into. And the first one is really a meaty thing because there's so many ways to approach this. Yet it's something that's so incredibly basic that everyone has to deal with in some way or another. And Mike, you were the one that suggested this idea of sampling rates and the disconnect that happens because of all the different things that we deal with. We deal with plugins, with our output formats. But matching sampling rate was actually a big thing when I was in college. I just want to share a little bit of a story here. When I was in college back in the late 90s, I had a professor tell me, if you ever want to deal with multiple pieces of digital audio, like a synth, an ADAT deck, just connecting things together, don't ever deal with some sort of software sample rate conversion. Just grab stuff out of the analog cables in and out of whatever devices you're dealing with, and let that handle everything. Don't bother with sample rate conversion in the box. And that actually stuck with me for quite a few years until I realized there's probably places where it's just fine. I can slim down my workflow here and there. But a whole lot of stuff, of course, has changed since the late 90s. Mike, since you started up this conversation with us before this episode, what are the things that you have seen when it comes to sample rate conversion in your various projects?
Well, what Vince is very diplomatically omitting is that we all were drawn into the subject when I confessed to having a really dumb question. And that is, why is it that regardless of the sample rate in our DAW, which typically means either picking 44.1 or 48, depending on what the delivery medium is, why is it that all our virtual instruments seem to magically know what the sample rate is, and why does playback of virtual instruments, particularly sample-based ones, why is it always the same? Why is it that a sample library that was recorded at 44.1 somehow sounds the same at 48? And is there some standard that allows all these virtual instruments to intelligently adapt? And we all did a little bit of, well, I think some people smarter than I actually knew the answer, which is that typical sample library playback engines will automatically resample as necessary on the fly, that in a way that is transparent to the end user. You don't see it faking. You don't see it saying, hold on while I convert the sample rate. It just seems to magically know. That seems like a pretty good recap of how we started down this dark path. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's about right. But yeah, some sample playback engines do in fact do that, and then some actually really don't. It's actually really easy for me to just dismiss everything as cakewalk. It's not cakewalk. Contact will handle everything because so many of our libraries are in fact Contact. It's kind of this new de facto standard, and the Contact player is pretty good at that stuff. Going down into the settings, it's possible to change just how sophisticated of an algorithm that Contact will use for the sample playback as well as sample rate conversion that it does on the fly. And you can set it differently based on whether it's playing back in real time or whether it's going to, or whether it's just going to render a file. And having that control is kind of nice, but honestly, with my somewhat high-powered PC, I don't see a problem with it doing the was it the crazy 64x oversampling type conversion that it does. It sounds good enough to me, so I just sit it on there and it works.
Well, that is the ultimate criteria. If it sounds great, then why bother getting fussing about it? However, I'll argue that if you know the behind the scenes contact or whatever playback engine you're using, maybe engine, if they're doing this extra work on the fly, then you know conceptually that your machine is processing more than it might need to be. And where this might become a practical issue is if you're doing, let's say, some massive orchestral cue and you've got layers and layers and layers and lots of things running concurrently. And like most people, you have a finite CPU. Sooner or later, you might hit a threshold where so much sample rate conversion is being done on the fly that there's a noticeable performance hit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there is something to that. I mean, with my orchestral templates, I definitely have dozens and dozens and dozens of tracks, and each one of those tracks with those plugins on it will take up a non-trivial amount of CPU. Something like 3%, 4%, and that adds up. Actually, Alex or Chase, do you guys worry much about how much your individual tracks or plugins are actually taken up when you're making music?
No, not so much anymore.
Not. Yeah, you got the power. You got the touch.
Yeah,
you got the power.
I'm trying to point to Chase.
I've upgraded my PC completely. Like, just built a whole new PC last year. I think just days before GDC happened, and wow, it's gonna take a lot. The only thing I realized, plugin software wise, it may bog down is that new Xenology synth, but anything else, it's been. I've tried it. The first thing I did was try like a robust orchestral template. Not even probably hitting 50 tracks. So maybe if I push to 300, I might tap into that. But the CPU is pretty solid. That King Ryzen,
Oh, okay. So you have a really recent machine then. Okay.
Oh yeah. This is solid state drives. The latest of that at least from 2019. I'm sure there's been an iteration of the King Ryzen chip, at least one that has come out since then. But yeah, all new overhaul.
Oh, yeah, that's cool. I mean, I guess I'm worried a little bit about CPU, and my machine is pretty hot, but pretty hot by 2013 standards, which is when that computer came out. I'm very happy with it, but still, it is a 2013 machine. What about you, Alex? You're not worrying so much about it?
No, it's a huge, huge concern for me because for the most part, my workflow up until about a year ago was 100% software synthesizers. Actually, a bit more than a year, maybe 2 years ago. There was a bit of a shift in the way that I work, but up until that point, it was basically always all soft synths all the time. And so when you're using sort of big CPU-hungry things like you hear Diva and the repro synthesizers and stuff like that, like they'll melt your machine. And so also because my primary DAW is not really designed to work that way, you can't just sort of freeze an entire track the way that I work. So the synths are always live, which means you have to be very, very careful about watching the CPU to make sure things don't sort of build up and get out of control. A previous incarnation of myself used to be very concerned with making sure that software synthesizers are remaining completely live all the way through the production process, so that when you come to press render at the very end, you're not rendering frozen tracks. You're rendering the whole thing generated in real time as you press render. The foolishness of my youth. I used to sort of thoroughly believe that it actually sounded better that way. theoretically, I suppose, yes, there could be an argument for technically why that could be possible. To render everything at the very end with everything live sounds better than if you just got a bunch of frozen tracks and then you're rendering that again. But about 2 years ago, I think I saw the light for it, which is a bit of a different conversation. And these days, I'm a bit less concerned with CPU because the way I work is much more CPU efficient than before. But yeah, it used to be my main thing was like watching that CPU percentage, keeping it in check, making sure that things don't go over, and then using that as kind of like the creative limitation to really stimulate getting more out of the instruments that I have rather than just loading up the tracks and layering on more and more useless stuff. Actually using the CPU as a means to sort of hold myself back and sort of think, well, no, how can I make more musically out of the select limited instruments that my computer can handle real time?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. I actually kind of want to jump to another aspect of the whole sampling rate thing, which is dealing with the disconnect between the sampling rate with which you're actually working on a project, as well as what is your output format. And not just output format, but is there a difference between, say, the output format that you maintain for yourself and your archival, as well as what is the final output format? I mean, I'm kind of thinking about this right now because I'm in the middle of doing a soundtrack. And putting a piece of music on any of the music aggregators, well, they all want 44.1. And of course, the stuff that I've been doing in game production has been very much at 48K. And that works because so much of the games that I've been doing have been at 48K, or actually, if we want to save some space, we'll do it at 32K and then compress from there. But of course, music still wants 44.1. How do you handle that? Are you actually rendering different stuff from your DAW project files? Are you content to say, I'm going to render my stuff at 48 or maybe at 96 or whatever, and then I'm going to resample to whatever other project use that I need? How are you going about doing things?
I used to, because I was always wanting to have everything live, it meant that in order to make a 44.1 version of my song, all I need to do is just render it again at 44.1. Just press render because it's all live anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And that was kind of one of the sort of weird benefits of the way that I used to think. Nowadays, I think I fall into the I think there was the latter category of what you said there, Vince, where I just don't worry about it. So I'll do 48 as a master. And then when it comes to making conversions for anything that needs 44.1, I just do a sample rate conversion in Audition or something like that. What about you guys, Mike and Chase?
I find that most of my clients in gaming don't even ask for masters. They say, send me MP3 or send me OGG. And I usually provide the masters as a courtesy, in which case it'll be whatever. Absent any specific request on their part, it'll just be whatever sample rate I happen to be using. When someone does want a master, it's always, if they're at that level of specificity, they always ask for 48. So then I'll provide that either by working that way natively or, as you say, just converting after the fact. A small sidebar on that subject. Speaking of batch conversion of sample rate for deliverable format, just so you know that this is a natural segue. I'm very excited to note that Myriad is back. The audio processing app, which is the very tool I would use traditionally for this exact process when it was time to spit out all the deliverables in whatever master format the client wanted. And I was really depressed for a while because that software went off the market for a while, and now it's back. So for those of you who are in the position of having a lot of deliverables for your game project and needing to batch convert the sample rate or do the other final stamping your URL on the deliverables or whatever it is, Myriad's back and you can get it again. So end of sidebar.
Quick question: is Myriad still Mac only?
it is a privilege of being a Mac owner to not notice or care about such things. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm looking at Synaptic's site because I've recently become a fan of Synaptic and some of their plugins. They have a couple of interesting things on sale right now. But as you say, Myriad is a really cool program for batch processing. I remember when I was looking at the first release of SoundForge for Mac, because I'm a longtime SoundForge user, which has historically been a Windows-only program. They made a Mac version about 4 or 5 years back. And quite honestly, it wasn't that good. And part of its failing was the fact that it didn't have good batch processing functionality the same way that the Windows version did. So I would have been served back then to know that, oh, okay, if I'm on my Mac, I could use Myriad. Instead, I actually ended up doing things like, just working on my PC or even moving things over the network to my PC so that I can batch process them. But I guess after that, I went on to Reaper, which has pretty decent batch processing functionality as well. Very different from SoundForge, but still very robust.
How about you, Chase? What do you use for? What do you do when it comes to picking your sample rate for production versus what happens when people want masters at different rates?
So I have my DAW set at a specific sample rate that I feel has just been fine for the projects that I've been hired on to do, and I know I was told by another composer that, it typically should be at least at 48K and like 24-bit at least between the two. And I've been streaming a lot more lately, and so just been messing around with whatever the restream audio settings have to be dealing with, and then making sure it streams correctly with the project and it's not changing the sample rate and moving things around. It just got kind of a pain. But if the project that I'm hired on to be on is like within decent and professional quality, without any hitches, then typically I'm just doing the 44 124-bit. And if a project calls for something higher, then I would just set that new project as such for just 48 and whatever sample rate, that's needed. Because I was reading something in the Facebook group a couple years ago and saying that developers really don't really hear the difference at like anything above that, like 90, 96 and such. And your compression is only going to go so much for really hearing the audio difference. And a lot of people for implementation, especially if you're not, some people who are not involved with that are not going to be able to tell. So I've been okay with just having the 44, 24-bit. If a developer or a client needs anything like less, I typically, like Vince, been using SoundForge for about a decade or so now, I would say, and the batch conversion process is quite smooth and it's reliable, and I'm pretty happy with it.
Cool.
Yeah, I kind of want to step back. Oh, go for it, Mike.
Well, Vince, I was actually going to ask you a question. I think you were the one who brought this up, but I think you mentioned that music sites and music delivery platforms still want 44.1 for audio. Was that you who mentioned that, Vince? So the question I have is why? And I know the historical answer is because 44.1 not kilohertz, but samples per second, was the sample rate used by physical CDs when that was the only commercially available digital audio format, and that was the rate at which these hardware players would play, and that's how you had to record. So there was a music-specific reason back in the day for 44.1, but why does anyone use it now?
That's a really good question. I mean, right now, I got to admit, I'm doing some research, and as I'm looking at different platforms and aggregators, they have very specific rules. And the rules are really important when you're dealing with stuff. Some of the rules are things related to metadata. If you have an album art, here are the rules for what the title can or should look like on the album art. And if you diverge from what the rule states, you're going to get kicked back and asked to redo it. this sampling rate thing is part of that. Hey, everyone is listening on their iPhones, on their Androids, on a streaming service. There really shouldn't be a reason why you can't deliver 44.1 or 48 or what have you. But I remember on TuneCore specifically, since that's the one I've recently been looking at, hey, your audio must be 44.1. And if I try uploading a 48K track, it's just going to balk at it and say, try again.
Surely it must be something to do with bandwidth, because when you're talking about streaming services and the general majority of the use case for something like Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube Music or something like that, like you think of the most, as far as the bell curve goes, you think of the kind of equipment that people would be using to reproduce music that comes from these services. More than often, I don't have any hard numbers, but probably, something like this would be where people are listening to their streaming services on Bluetooth headphones. And at that point, really, the difference between 44.1 and 48, if even you're doing that, like, say, something like Tidal, because I think the Tidal's premium super duper HD tier streams at 44.1, but at that point, is anybody really realistically going to be able to hear the difference between 44.1 and 48, and the amount that you would save as far as the bandwidth between streaming 44.1 versus 48? It seems like 44.1 makes the most sense as a sort of a good compromise.
I guess so, but even then, it's considering the way that formats have worked these days. All the modern compression formats are going to be these frequency windowing type of algorithms, which are going to decorrelate from actual sample rate. If you have an MP3 that is high quality MP3, 320 kilobits per second, it doesn't matter whether the audio it's compressing from is 44.1 or 48. It's just, hey, it's a 320 kilobit per second stream.
I'm guessing there's just some legacy component, be it software or hardware, in the pipeline used by some of these services, or it may just be procedural. There might be some dude who is responsible for some part of the process who's just used to 44.1 from the good old days of $20 CDs. And I have a feeling that rather than bandwidth considerations are what's holding it back, because as Vince says, we're all streaming at a highly compressed format, which is agnostic to the source sample rate, if I understand things correctly.
Yeah. Let's see. I want to go back a little bit because there's something that I was discovering while I was going down the rabbit hole when it came to sample rate and how should I set up my projects. And that while Contact is awesome, there are actually a whole lot of players that react weird when you do different things to them. So sometimes it's related to sample rate. A lot of times it's just related to buffering sizes. Like I noticed that certain plugins of mine that don't use Contact, audio modeling, for example, if you set the buffer rate too low, something like 32 samples or 64 samples, it's just not going to like you at all. It doesn't matter how powerful your machine is. It doesn't matter whether you have anything else going on at the same time. It's just going to balk. And then there are some other plug-in playback software that I've been messing with where it will just outright refuse if you're not running the right sample rate. So one of my favorite guitar plugins from way back in the day, and by back in the day I mean about 10 years ago, which is kind of an eternity when it comes to virtual instruments. Real Guitar wants you to actually install individual sample rate libraries for every type of production that you might have. So you have to install the 44 kilohertz library, install the 48 kilohertz library. And if you don't have one and you try to set your DAW project file to that sample rate, it's just not going to work. And I thought that was really crazy. It seemed really silly to me, but in fact, the sample developers decided that this is actually the best way to do it. Maybe it's a function of their player technology, or maybe they really did feel that if we do it this way, then we really preserve the integrity and the quality of the sample library that we're giving the user.
Yeah,
it is a strange bit of specificity.
I can't imagine installing 3 different library stuff now. Like, I'm just so spoiled now for just hey, we're just 64-bit library. We're not gonna worry about your 32. If you want to do that, you better get JBridge and be on your way.
Yeah.
Now, relevantly to this is the question of the native sample rate used by the various virtual instrument developers, those who are providing sample-based instruments rather than strictly synthesized ones, since anything based on a recording has to have been done at a specific sample rate. So you might argue if all your sample libraries are running 48, you might as well always run your ship at 48 as well, unless a client specifically asks for 44.1. So interestingly, way back in 2014, somebody who will only be known as Andrew posted a scholarly series of findings on a audio forum, which appears to have the unfortunate name of audiosex.pro. And he apparently took a survey of the popular families of virtual instruments as of 2014. Standard disclaimers apply about the march of technology. And he actually broke it down by which manufacturers are using 44.1 and which are using 48. And the state of the art as of 2014 is that there's no one standard amongst the most popular manufacturers. I won't read everything, but just at a glance, the postulation is that 8DO sometimes uses 44.1 and sometimes uses 48. Cinesamples is at 48, but East-West is East-West listed? I thought they were. Maybe they're not, but I seem to remember anecdotally that East-West is doing 44.1. So it seems like there's a split among some of the power players. Spitfire is at 48. So unfortunately for me, there's no clear answer unless I happen to be using a lot of Spitfire in a project or something like that. Mm-hmm. But you can look at this list, or perhaps someone's made a more comprehensive and more up-to-date successor to this list, and note your own sample library use. And if it turns out that everything you're doing was originally recorded at 48, then you will get some kind of benefit, perceptible or not, in adhering to that sample rate and sparing contact or whatever the agony of the sample rate conversion on the fly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's also worth noting, higher is not better. I'm looking at this list right now, and it says 48 kilohertz is used by a bunch of people that make very great libraries. 8DO, Cinesamples, Cinematic Strings. I'm going down. Sonivox. Man, it's been a while since they were real legit players in the space. I mean, their stuff was good back in the early 2000s, but higher is not always better.
Let's I was wondering, it's a bit of a segue-less transition to a different topic. Did you guys totally segue-less? Look at that, smooth. Did you guys see that Twitter thread, that monster Twitter thread that was going about a week ago with asking game audio composers about 3 interesting facts about their workflows?
I did see that, yes.
Oh yeah. I checked that out as well, although I was a little bit scared to participate just because I wasn't sure what I should say. Should I try to do something that's like really funny, or should I try to do something that's like really deep and insightful, or do I want to do something that could be like really usable, but I also didn't want to convey it as showing off, or I wasn't sure. I was really tempted to respond to the thread, but
I think there's only one thing for it. We're going to have to do it now. I think that's all there is to it, because I didn't actually write anything into that thread. Did you post anything to the thread, Chase?
Nope, I sure didn't. Okay. I looked at it and I was like, nah.
Mike? No?
I only became aware of it through you, so no. Right.
Okay, well, there's only one thing for it. Chaps, it's it's time to do it right now. So let's. I think we better start with Chase. Always start with Chase. When in doubt, start with Chase.
Sure. So, facts of things as a composer. Well, I guess I'll start with this. I've had this toy since I was 5, and I actually now use it in my composing process when I do jams like Metroidvania, which I just finished. I used to like and love the key of E minor. That is no longer the case. I typically write in very difficult keys and polyrhythms and odd chord progressions. Next.
Whoa! That just you can't just settle on that. You got to expound a bit more, please.
Wait. Oh no, hold on. Twitter was very succinct.
Well, this is not Twitter. This is not Twitter here.
I have questions though. Wait a moment. You said you tend to write in very difficult keys. What is a difficult key?
All the sharps and all the flats.
Okay. So first of all, I'm going to say that all the sharps and all the flats is the best key. I mean, I'm being a little bit silly there. I know what you mean about it being a difficult key, but for me as a pianist, it's actually the easiest key because when you use the black keys, then there's like a natural, longer fingers rest on those keys, and it feels more natural. So that's exactly right. Because I can tell you, I absolutely suck at keyboards, and but the best way to look like you kind of know what you're doing with a keyboard is to bang down an octave B with like that in the bottom, and then just mash on the black keys. Yes. Yeah. That is true. That is pretty great.
It's like bang down the B, put down the pedal, and just like twinkle some black keys up the top, and then everybody will say, "Wow, that's really beautiful." Yeah, I'm a keyboard player.
It works. It totally works.
Mike, your face is saying way too much. Please tell us what you're thinking.
That's the last time I ever worked with Alex, is what Mike's thinking.
Oh no, the more musically illiterate you come across, the better it is for me. I can do that jam thing in any key, not just me.
That's right.
I mean, I use the transpose button, but still, I can do it in any key.
All right, so I think with that you've pretty much invited the pointer to go around to you next, Mike. So let's hear your 3 interesting facts about you and your workflow and your history and all of that.
So since I haven't seen the Twitter thread, is it specifically about your workflow, or is it just about you in general? Is it like I killed a man once and no one's caught me?
I think it might be worthwhile to check out some of these responses. So like I think one of the really neat responses is by Nabil Ansari. So he has some bullet points. One of them I thought was really interesting. I use polyrhythmic metric interests to make up for the extreme insecurity that I have with melody and harmony. It's like, I mean, that's like, oh, that's interesting. And also like, okay. I mean, I personally have like insecurities about certain things, but I never really thought about the fact that, but I used these particular strengths in order to make up for it. But I guess it makes sense. You can't be awesome at everything when it comes to music production, right? Or even just basic composition. But something that maybe sheds a little bit of light on how you do music.
Yeah, it's funny. I think there's a generational gap in that younger people are much more acclimatized to being honest and to sharing vulnerabilities. So, I mean, it sounds like people are answering the thread like, I'm musically illiterate and I'm completely lack confidence and I don't know what I'm doing and I cry most of the day. Whereas you get an older composer, there's sort of this older school attitude of never admit any weakness. And if you're in a position of acknowledging a fault, it's always like, I care about my clients too much. I don't put anything above their needs. I want them to have the best possible score, and I do nothing. I stop at nothing to give, some kind of non-answer like that.
Yeah, I think, Mike, that's the difference between somebody who's done a lot of job interviews and somebody who hasn't. Because it's the standard, like, what is your weakness in the job interview? Well, my weakness is I'm too detail-oriented You know, I'm just. So,
I spend too much time perfecting my craft when I should be goofing off more. I know, it's just
right.
to actually answer the question. I'll try to come up with something that I can't promise it's that interesting, but I write better, not faster, but better when I'm in a visual medium like notation. And often, even if I'm doing a score that's going to be produced electronically, I'll do a pass on paper because I'll write better counterpoint, my orchestration will be more interesting, and then I'll go and play in each line individually. So it'll feel more like, this is kind of for orchestral and live emulations. I'll play in each line individually as a way of trying to approximate the sound of an orchestra or the kind of collaborative counterpoint. And it's a very slow way to work, so I don't always have the luxury, but I definitely write smarter when I do that.
Wow. That's.
I think that's really good
That's
comment.
so cool.
Yeah. I'm going to just
question.
riff off of that because I feel I'm kind of the opposite. So, I'm actually thinking about how that was actually one of the thread lines that I saw in this entire Twitter thread. There were definitely some comments about, I start in notation, or I'm always have notation versions of everything that I do, or I never touch notation. For me, I do touch both sides. I'll do things in the DAW, and I will do things in Sibelius, and I've been messing around with Dorico lately. But one thing that I've noticed about myself is that I tend to be more composery when I'm working in the DAW as opposed to when I'm working in notation. So if I want to do something like a fugue, for example, it feels easier for me to do that sort of stuff in a DAW where I'm dealing with the various fugal techniques in a very abstract way and just avoiding the way it looks on paper. I'll just like, okay, I've got this, copy, paste, retrograde, invert. I feel like I'm faster doing those types of things in a DAW versus on notation, even though Sibelius and Dorico totally have those functions. Those are actually really easy things to do in both of those programs. But there's just something about me in particular where I find it easier to do that in a DAW. I'm actually reminded of the first time that I had to write, I wrote a 3-voice fugue in a class at school. And I actually did it after just struggling on paper for a while. What I ended up doing was just loading up Impulse Tracker and notating it in Impulse Tracker because it was very easy for me to just conceptualize dealing with the notes as abstract data in that space versus on paper or on notation. So, yeah, that I don't know what you guys think about that. I think that's kind of weird, but it's a thing.
I'm literally exploding with joy on the inside. Anyway, Mike, that's number one. You had two others.
I'll annotate Vince's explanation by commenting that that's the kind of thing that people who are very good at piano say, and those of us who are not don't write complex counterpoint in real time in a DAW. Or if we do, we do it in 500 passes, 499 of which are edits and kind of manual manipulations of the piano roll. I'm struggling here, but number two is I sometimes make use of classical composition techniques, including the old standbys that Vince alluded to, retrograde and inversion and such, though I will typically improvise themes first and then apply those compositional techniques to them later. I will sometimes go through a phase of just improvising a lot, and then I'll put them on paper, and then I'll say, here's what I just kind of came up with, and now let's try to process it in interesting ways, and can I get 4 free themes by taking the thing I improvised and then doing retrograde and inversion, and other kinds of manipulations. So I've gotten a lot of mileage out of those techniques, and I've actually got myself out of some real tight deadlines by using them to surprisingly good effect. But I rarely start composition with any kind of algorithmic or procedurally generated music, to put a a modern spin on a very old concept.
Cool.
I guess I have to
Cool.
come up with a number 3. Number three, what would be interesting? So it's kind of contemporary, what we do in real time. This is kind of an offshoot of number 2, but I've even dabbled a little bit with tone rows in recent memory, which aesthetically I do not cherish listening to. But a tone row or any technique, you can differentiate the technique from the aesthetic. So typically when we think of 12-tone music, we think of somebody, kind of smacking their forehead on a keyboard and saying, that sounds great. But what I found is you can take techniques like that and use it to create very tonal sounding music. And I did this recently in a concert piece where I just said, I'm going to take a tone row, but I'm going to make it as tonal sounding as possible. And I opened up with kind of 2/5 in a row. And it actually was an interesting technique because it allowed me to come up with something that was consonant by and large, but also a little different from what I would normally improvise. And I picked that as a constraint of the piece. I said, you're going to go with this tone row, and it modulates in a slightly odd way, but you're going to run with that. And it came out rather well.
Wow.
That's cool. That's cool. Actually, I remember my graduating. So I was privileged to go to a high school that had a special interest music program that was sponsored by the government, and I was my major was composition, and I think I remember my graduation piece was it was 12-tone for sine waves, I think it was like 4 sine waves. And that actually had the pretentiousness to name it something like, I can't remember what it's called, like toccata for 4 sine waves on a tone row or something like that. 12-tone. Bad memories.
Well, hey, we all have to do those. No, we don't all have to do them. But you had to do it. You had to do it to get to where you are now.
So I guess I'll chip in with my 3. I guess you guys are probably going to be ready for these to be really weird because that's the way that I do things, I suppose. Actually, only one of them is extremely weird. But the first one won't surprise you at all. My primary MIDI controller is the QWERTY keyboard. Nobody's saying anything because it's like, yeah, here he goes.
Hey, that works well with Fruity Loops, Alex, which I know that you're dabbling with.
There you go. Yeah. No, actually, this is the problem with being a bass player. There's no real sort of easy route for inputting MIDI data with a bass guitar. There are like MIDI controllers and stuff for bass, but it's not worth it after it. Like, it's just, and it's a big, heavy instrument. You just you got to get it on your lap and okay, there's my one note, onto the next track. It's just not worth it. So I do have a MIDI keyboard, and I use the MIDI keyboard to work out chord progressions and stuff like that, but everything else is done on a QWERTY keyboard in whatever DAW I'm using, which is kind of strange, but I just don't really feel very comfortable with playing anything on a regular keyboard because my skills at piano are so awful. So that's that one. And that's probably the reason why I tend to gravitate to something like Renoise or things that make it very, very fast to go between QWERTY input and your song.
Okay, cool.
It's all right, guys. I forgive you for having no specific comment about that amazing nugget of brilliance that I just dropped there.
All right. Well, just to tag on to that, that's actually how I started with Fruity Loops. That's why I had mentioned it to you. And you might actually find that playing with the QWERTY keyboard with the patch in FL Studio, which I believe is something bass, it's blue or whatever like that, you may not like it, but it is very helpful. And I challenge you actually to do chords on the QWERTY keyboard like I had to do in 2000 and see how that works out, because it is quite fun.
All right, I'm gonna have to do some investigation immediately after this show is over, I think. Number 2. Yes.
Oh, I was gonna say, honestly, I don't mind the QWERTY keyboard. I have a tracking or background, so I don't mind it. The biggest problem was chording, because there were some DAWs that you could do QWERTY keyboard input with, And I realized that my keyboard itself was a limitation because chording across the various zones of a keyboard was really inconsistent. And I realized, oh man, I want to be able to keep on going with this. I want to do more complex stuff. Oh, I guess I have to get a MIDI keyboard at that point.
Yeah, see, that's why if you kind of adhere to the hardcore tracker approach, which means you're never actually entering in chords because you've got a chord as a sample.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, certainly when you're dealing with, if you're dealing with just 4 tracks or 8 tracks, it certainly changed a lot once you got into fast tracker, impulse tracker world where it's like 24 channels, whatever.
Right. Yeah, because nowadays, like I'll when I've found a patch that I want, I will then go ahead and create a few inversions and a few different chords as samples, and then input those with a QWERTY keyboard. That's how poor my keyboard skills are. Anyway, moving on. I have an intense insecurity when it comes to song structure. And just
really?
like that person, yes, just like that person you just mentioned who tends to compensate with polyrhythms and stuff like that, I tend to compensate with anything I can find to gloss over the fact that when it comes to song structure, once again, I'm doing ABA, and just don't tell anybody.
And when you say song structure, do you specifically mean song form, or you just mean musical structure generally?
I mean song form. So, for example, if I'm making a piece, I'm not talking about if we're talking like adaptive music or things like that, because obviously then you don't have to, you're making parts that get assembled in middleware later on anyway. But if we are making a piece of music, for example, make a loop for the credits roll or something like that, or, in those cases, I tend to have a problem doing anything except ABA, and it's quite embarrassing.
I got to admit, I would have never guessed.
Yeah, me too. Because your last piece you shared with us was like 6 minutes. That's a big structure, and it didn't sound like ABA to me.
Yeah, it's actually like ABA. Well, it's more like ABA, BDB. ABA, CDC, EFE.
So through
like
compose. That. So you've got song form down. You're past ABA. We're good.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Last one is that actually Mike and Vince might remember this. That the very first major game audio project that I did, which was about I think 7 years ago, I spent 2 years on a project entirely synthesizing sounds. So it was a 2-year project where there were no sampled sounds in it at all. So all of the sound effects were synthesized from scratch to sound realistic.
So can I show the coaster of it, or would you prefer I not?
Yes, you can, if you like.
We're talking about this? Is it that?
That's the one.
I still have it.
And it was actually a cancelled project in the end because for a number of really complicated reasons. But I learned a very, very important lesson over those 2 years, that indulging myself in thinking, I'm going to make this game stand out by having 100% synthesized sound effects. And people are going to love the fact that they're not listening to real sampled sound. They're listening to, all of these kind of zany tricks that I was doing to make sort of realistic sounding sound effects out of synthesizers. Then I realized after 2 years that nobody cares how you made the sounds for the game. Does it actually make the experience better? Yes or no? And in the end, the answer was pretty much nope, because nobody cares how you made the sounds for this game. Does it sound really good? Well, not that great, because I spent so much time trying to make things sound realistic using synthesizers that it would have been just much faster to either record sounds myself or go straight to sample libraries or things like that. So, yes.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
That was my lesson. Nobody cares about the way that I do my work, which is why like, using QWERTY input or only ever doing ABA or, any all of that kind of stuff has been an exciting journey for me.
Alex, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for your vulnerability.
I think it's great, honestly. I know I only did one there, just talking a little bit about the composition in DAW versus notation. So I'll go quickly with two more.
Sorry, you only did one. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's cool. I mean, I also don't want necessarily all these points to be just riffing off what other people say. But I did want to say, actually, that I think being indulgent is actually really important when you are working on a project for a significant amount of time. I think it's a lot easier to be, hey, 6 months, a year. Oh, I'm going to be totally focused on what the project needs, screw myself. But if it's going to be longer than that, I think being a little bit indulgent and having those inner needs that you're going to satisfy in parallel with the needs of the project, I think that's really important. So
that I think, just to cap on that last point that you said there is key, like in parallel with the needs of the project. Yeah. And that is the mistake that I made, because the project didn't need synthesized sounds and didn't really necessarily benefit from them. It was totally self-indulgent for my own. And I learnt a huge amount in the way that sound works and acoustic science and how to, like, okay, I need to make the sound of a car door slamming. So how would I do that? So thinking about, okay, you've got sheet metal that's reverberating through the inner lining of the car, and then you've got the mechanism on the door, the latch that clicks, and you've got all of these things. How do I synthesize all of that from like a basic subtractive synthesizer to make it sound realistic? That's fantastic. But is that in parallel with the needs of the project? Absolutely not, because nobody cares. Mm-hmm. Does it sound good or not, at the end of it? So, yeah, I totally agree that it is a really good idea to find something that you can learn and you can grow from, but you should just ask yourself, wait a moment, does the project benefit from this before you start on that pathway?
Right. So I guess I will parlay that into my second point, which is I do iwi. I mean, iwi is just one of these things I do, and I think that is a pretty unique point for me as a composer, music producer, whatnot. I specifically got into iwi because I thought that it would be better for the project which I was embarking on, which was Sky. So Sky, big, long project, and in that first year, I thought, I need to up my game in terms of expression, because I think that the expression of the individual instruments of our synthesized orchestra are really important when it comes to selling these mock-ups internally within the studio, as well as getting them even further once they are fully produced pieces of music. So if it wasn't for that project, I'm not sure if I would be an iwi player, but now I'm an iwi player. And that's a thing.
That is really cool. I bet people don't know when they listen to your amazing soundtrack for Sky, like when it's a cello or something like that. They probably don't realize that they're actually listening to you playing that on an iwi.
Yeah.
Unless they watch the stream.
Yep.
Then they know.
Let's see. So that's a second point. Let me think of a third point. I actually mentioned this to you a little bit before, but if you want to be vulnerable. Oh, wait. Damien did say, you better show us what an iwi is. This is an iwi. It is a crazy wind controller, and I use this in order to play all of the stuff for a lot of the music that I do. Obviously not keyed instruments, so not for piano or guitar or harp, but I do use it for recording strings and brass, in addition to woodwinds for all of my orchestral mock-ups, and I try to get it to that point in a shippable form with my iwi performance. So that's the thing. That's what I do.
I have a perfect topic for next time.
Oh, next time.
I'm going to write it down.
All right. Okay, cool. So while you're writing that down, third point, I guess I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable and talk about jazz. So I love jazz. I love jazz fusion. I am such a classical music pianist and composer. If like I grew up doing, playing in my hometown church and be like, okay, you want me to do certain things on the organ, I can do this stuff. And it's an old school type of church, Roman Catholic. So I was doing things in that style. And if I needed to vamp for a while the priest was tarrying somewhere, I could do that. That sort of improvisation, no problem for me. Jazz, whether it be in a bebop idiom or a cool idiom or like the sort of like crazy, rock, prog sort of stuff. Oh my God. Like, I struggle with that. I mean, I hear it, I think it, I know what I want to do with it, but just my finger virtuosity on the piano, it's so locked onto very classical sorts of idioms. And it's hard for me to get out of that. I end up doing things that, okay, that sounds kind of nice and Ravel, but it doesn't sound like prog, It's really frustrating for me. I have to work so hard if I want to do anything that sounds really like fusion jazz or prog rock or anything like that, even though I love that stuff. I love listening to it.
What happens when you don't try to play any specific genre and you just try to play Vince? What does it sound like?
Mozart. No, I mean, seriously. Like, honestly, if you... Like, give me a Mozart piano concerto over so much of what exists in the classical world. I maybe I'm kind of a weirdo like that. I know a lot of composers are like, okay, Mozart's the boring stuff. But honestly, I think Mozart is just this beautiful, pure thing that I just can't help but aspire to, both consciously and subconsciously. And when I think about forms, when I think about melodic structure, when I think about harmonies, it's like my brain just naturally goes to high classical like that.
I don't know, Vince. I'm not convinced. I have the pleasure and the privilege and the honor of standing next to you in a music shop in Osaka, watching you play the piano, and I think your definition of what classifies as prog fusion jazz noodling, I think, is too narrow. Because when I remember listening to what you were doing, and I said, "What is that, Vince?" and you said, "I don't know. I'm just kind of like, just playing away." And it's like this concert of jazz angels singing this incredible requiem of prog glory flowing out, and everybody in the music shop's like kind of turning around, like, who's that guy? And to hear you say now that like you just can't do prog Jews, and I think actually your idea of what it is that you're striving for with that genre might be extremely well defined, and what you think that you're actually not able to do, actually anybody else might listen to your broad approach at that style of music and think that is some good fusion keyboard.
Okay, well, thank you. Those were very kind words, and I am really quite humbled to hear that. Now, let's not tarry too long on that. I mean, I suppose like some of the stuff that I think about is like, a really good John Petrucci solo, or a really good, Masahiro Ando solo, or something like that. It's like, man. And those require a certain virtuosity, which honestly, I know I don't have. I have classical chops, and classical chops are just very different from really well-exercised jazz chops like some of those guys have. Yeah. Whether you're a fusion jazz guy or a bebop jazz guy, I know I don't have those chops. So, thank you for those really kind words. But yeah, I would definitely never put myself out there as, I'm as good as any sort of professional studio jazz keyboardist.
That's fine, because you don't have to be. You can just be Vince.
Yeah. That's it. I'm just Vince. And we are running a little bit long, but we also started a little bit late. I do want to mention a couple of interesting news things, because in the game world, there's been a lot of stuff that's been announced. So, first of all, are we playing anything? Well, actually, before we get into are we playing anything, are we anticipating playing anything that has been just announced in the news?
I think I mentioned this last time, but I'm really looking forward to Ghost of Tsushima.
Oh, yes.
I may or may not have pronounced that. But that kind of looks like Samurai Skyrim, and I am all about that kind of gameplay.
I'm with Mike on that one. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Oh, man. I'm looking forward to that as well, although I got to admit, during the PS5 stream that happened last week, there was there were a lot of games that were announced there. There was a game called Stray that really caught my eye, where you play as a cat.
Yeah.
I am all about that. Okay, Samurai Skyrim, I get you. I think that's cool. But yes, I want to play Stray. Oh, Damien in the chat is saying Jet. Oh,
Jet.
I
Yes,
want to check that
yes.
out too. The new Super Brothers game. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I saw that one too. Actually, the one that that really it's not really necessarily part of the new rift of games that are coming, but there's a game that released a gameplay trailer recently. A fairly, I think it's been in development for some years now. It's called EXO 1.
Oh, wait a minute. Excellent.
And yeah, it's EXO space 1. Very simple but really wonderful art concept. So you can check out that one. It's a science fiction game, sort of science fiction exploration game. Have a look at the most recent gameplay trailer that was dropped a few days ago.
Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, I agree. Jet also was the one game that sort of is ticking all the boxes of something that I would really be interested to check out. That soundtrack, very Interstellar, M83, Zimmer, plus, I don't know, a whole bunch of other cool stuff. Very nice.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that too. Yes, the game and the music. And oh man, yes. New Super Brothers. I am all about that.
Project Athia, that's another one I'm pretty excited for. I was thinking of that one is pretty interesting. That weird one, Pragmata, kind of seems like another Hideo Kojima game. Actually, Little Devil Inside is another one I'm extremely excited for. That one looked the best out of my pick that I would like to get my hands on and explore some more.
Mm-hmm.
And Returnal, dying, that whole time loop thing. I hope that doesn't become another trope of mechanics. Like first it's like Battle Royale, and now we're going to do time loops. Oh man, that's going to make me so sad.
I mean, I like the time loop concept, but yeah, I felt it. It seemed like this was going again and again. It just came up in more games than I was expecting. So we'll see if it wears out its welcome. But I don't know. I mean, it does look like a good game, and I'm looking forward to it. But certainly, when it comes to the games I'm looking forward to most, some of those different ones, Stray, Jet, yeah, well, Pragmata, yeah, Hideo Kojima, but Pragmata is actually a Capcom game, right?
Well, yeah, I don't know the developer. I was just saying it looks similar to something that Hideo Kojima might do or might have been involved with development with.
Right. Well, I mean, that's all the future, but are you guys playing anything right now?
Yeah, I'm playing a lot of Metroidvania Jam games because I participated in it. So I'm playing other people's entries and checking out what they did. And then very, 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 very late at night, when it's all the work is done, I've revisited. I go to Switchland and play Breath of the Wild because I can do anything. I can cook. I can go visit a fairy. I can ride a dragon, maybe. I can get worked by the Lionel. I just don't care. I just need something to just not think about the world I'm in now and go to Switchland, and that's very peaceful.
Mm-hmm. Cool. What about you guys? Mike, are you playing anything at the moment? Or are you consuming any other media?
Well, game-wise, I've been kind of sticking with my standbys as I wait for the aforementioned Ghost of Tsushima. I still own, what is it? Sekiro, which another samurai game, which I actually was about to get into, but I was like, this one looks more exciting, so I'm actually postponing till July. But
Just do it.
Other media-wise, I just finished Bender of the Expanse, which is an amazing sci-fi show that's, I think, Amazon. I think it was an Amazon original. But if you like science fiction with a little bit of science and a realistic-ish depiction of how ships would actually travel and fight each other, that's a great show.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Alex, how about you?
Instead of what am I playing? Because you all know the answer to that. Can I do a what am I listening to?
Yes, absolutely. Media consumption.
That's still playing, Alex. That's still playing. You're playing music.
Yes, that's right. I have been getting a lot into some alternative metal, and the album that's in heavy rotation at the moment is from a Norwegian band called Leprous, and the album is called Melina from 2017, and it's really, really interesting. I think metal is one of those genres that has very, very sort of tightly defined kind of cues to let you know that this is heavy metal music, right? You need this and you need that. You need the double kicks and you need the chugging guitars and you need, the growling vocals and stuff like that. So when you start to get very progressive and when people intentionally set out to break those rules of these key cues that inform this genre of metal music, you get some really, really interesting stuff. And this band, Leprous, is a really good example of that. So yeah, I encourage you to check out this album called Melina from 2017 by the Norwegian band Leprous. That is all.
Ooh. All right. Cool. I'm a big fan of Scandinavian rock and metal like that. Man. Oh, sorry. Now I was going to say something and now I'm just thinking about various types of metal. I'm like, oh man, it's been a while since I've listened to any like really cool symphonic metal or speed metal or anything, because those were in like really heavy rotation for me a few years back, and it's been a while since I've listened to anything cool. So Leprous, I will check that out.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Mike.
I was just going to say, share the link with us if you feel inclined.
Okay, I will do.
All right. I got to admit, I've been playing some older games. For a long time, I've actually avoided Celeste, and then I started to play it again. And I got to admit, it's because I got this bundle that actually came out last week. If you go to Itch.io right now, they are currently selling their bundle for racial justice and equality, which is great. And it's kind of crazy just how much is in there. Because for a minimum purchase price of $5, you get 1,700 games added to your Itch.io library, which is crazy. And not all the games are brilliant, but there are quite a few games that are, in fact, brilliant in there. So Celeste is one of them. I know many people already have it. But there's all these other games that I'm very interested in, too, like Overland and Night in the Woods and Sky Rogue and 2064 Read-Only Memories, which I played before. But there's just so much stuff here that I think it's really worth checking out. It's just an insane amount of content. And this bundle is currently in its last 10 hours. So if you're listening to us live, or I guess up to 10 hours from now, you still have a chance to get this bundle, and I highly recommend it.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's what's going on. I'm probably not going to play all 1,700 games, I got to admit, but it's cool. So, yeah. This was a pretty good game audio hour, even if it started a little late. Sorry about that. Sorry to you guys, because I left you hanging while you're waiting for me to start up this stream. And sorry to our listeners for starting so late, but thank you for actually sticking with us through this. We had a pretty nice crowd on both Twitch and YouTube this time, and we're going to keep on going with that in the future. If you haven't already, you should check us out on Twitter. I'm trying to be a little bit more active on Twitter, so you could follow us there, follow us on Facebook, and we'll keep you updated on when future episodes are going to come your way. Right now, tentatively scheduled for 2 weeks from now, and assuming all goes well, we'll see you then. Thank you, and later. Bye.